Hello to both Magic the Gathering and Final Fantasy fans alike. Yes, that's right. Unless you've been living under a bridge, you've probably heard that just over the hill lies a brand spanking new Universes Beyond Magic the Gathering set dedicated entirely to the world of Final Fantasy. I do have to confess that I unfortunately am a terrible gamer and have barely even touched a Final Fantasy game. I know. I've just never been one for turn-based combat, really. I will say Expedition 33 is making a strong case for me that I've been wrong the whole time. Final Fantasy 16 has been on my list for a while. That one looks really action-y. And on top of that, I have recently purchased Final Fantasy X. Have I booted it up? No, but someday, probably, maybe, most likely. But look, even without a connection to the IP, I must admit, as a Commander player, they are cooking mechanically in this set. So I thought from the perspective of an outsider, I wanted to go through what I thought were the coolest new legends in this set. And maybe some of you Final Fantasy experts out there can give me some context for my favorites in the comments down below. And hey, while you're down there, consider hitting that like button. It super helps the channel, and if you're new here, think about sticking around a while and hitting that subscribe button and helping me reach my goal this year of 5,000 subscribers. We actually just past 2,000, so I just want to say a big thank you to everybody out there who's been commenting, liking, supporting. It's been great. But let's keep going. So I wanted to split these cards into some general categories to just give it some structure. But I'm going to start with a grouping of cards that didn't really fit super well into any of these categories. So let's just start with a couple of what I'll call mechanically focused cards. Starting with one of the two Y'shtolas coming out, we have Y'shtola Rule, who is a mono blue legend who is one of our first End Steps Matter deck like this. And let me just stop you right now and say I'm probably going to get a bunch of the names wrong. And in fact, I'll just say I am going to get a bunch of the names wrong, but I'll do my best. They say at the beginning of your end step, exile target creature you control. Then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Then, if it's the first end step of the turn, there's an additional end step after this step. So not only are we getting basically another Conjurer's Closet teleportation circle type effect, but we're also getting a second end step to re-trigger a bunch of end step shenanigans. Being in mono blue, I could see this actually being a really controlling deck with lots of ETB control options like Agent of Treachery, Fencer Shaper Savant, and Meteor Golem, but there is tons more fun to be had here in terms of effects like Astral Dragon, Peregrine Drake, and a slew of other value generators. Next up is Stiltskin, Moogle Merchant, who does remind me a lot of Zedru from way back, and I think in general the game plan is going to be very similar, so I don't want to go too deep on it, but basically you're gaining value for yourself while giving other pieces that you don't want, like Grid Monitor, Rust Elemental, and Steel Golem to your opponents. Or you can do something really cheesy like use up all of the 8 lives on 9 lives and then give it to an opponent. If nothing else, it's probably just a really great addition to the regular Zedru deck, but I'm always happy to see more cheesy mechanics. This next one here almost feels like one of those deck building traps that you just thirst over and then 90% of the time you can't pull it off, but you're just chasing the high of that 10% of the time that it does work. I'm talking about Xenos, Yay Galvis. This card is just so sick at its high end, but oh man. It says that when it enters, you may choose a creature an opponent controls. Until end of turn, creatures other than Xenos and the chosen creature get -2, -2. And then, when that creature leaves the battlefield, transform them. So essentially you're just telling everyone like, hey, back the fuck off, make some damn room. Me and that dude right there are gonna fight. You're really just calling your shot. And when you do flip them, they become a flying 8/8, and they say to now instead choose an opponent. When that opponent loses, you win the game. So then you take it up a notch and you say, all right, I called my shot. I took out your little minion, now I'm coming for you. And when I get you, it's over. It's just such a cool, like, villain deck. It makes me just want to show up to the table and like cosplay and just be like role playing a real diabolical son of a bitch the whole time. I think the components of the deck are less important. I think it ends up being sort of a mono black good stuff deck with lots of removal and maybe a Voltron package probably, but the card itself is just so sick. All right, this next one is so my shit, it's not even funny. This is Kefka, Dancing Mad. They are a 7-mana 6/6 that say during your turn, they are indestructible, and that at the beginning of the next end step, exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. You may cast any number of spells from among those cards exiled this way, without paying their mana cost. Then, each player who owns a spell you cast this way loses life equal to its mana value. So that indestructible is really nice because it ensures that we actually do make it at least to our first end step with Kefka to get that trigger. Then we get to steal some cards from our opponents for free and deal damage to them. Makes me want to put in like Karavik and File Smasher all together in one big deck and just clown around. This one is definitely on my short list of decks that I might build from this set. Which, by the way, let me know down in the comments if you'll be building any decks from this set and which ones you might like to see a deck tech on. The next one I just kind of wanted to glaze over a bit here is Yuna, Grand Summoner, who is just a really sweet value commander that taps for mana, gives you counters on your creatures, and to top it off is an Ozolith in the command zone. I don't really have much to say about it that you probably couldn't put together yourself, but it's just a really great commander that gives a ton of value and can enable a breadth of different creatures and counter decks in Bant. Okay, now I want to talk about some spell slinging commanders, because this is probably the most spell slinging creatures I've been into in a single set. Like I said, mechanically, it just feels like they're just doing some really good work over there for this set. I mean, I can't tell flavor-wise how much of it they're matching up with these characters, but they usually do a really great job of that sort of thing. So let's start with the other Y'shtola, Knights Blessed, who is the face of one of our new commander decks, actually. I think control can be a pretty difficult archetype to play in commander, so the value and the game plan that I think this card provides gives you a really clear path of how we can actually win in that style of deck, rather than just stalling out for one big win con. Not that you couldn't do that here. They say at the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card. And also that whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Y'shtola deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. So without having to say anything, I think we can all see the path laid out pretty clear. As long as we keep 3 mana value non-creature cards coming, we slowly drain out our opponents while at the same time slowing their game plan with counter spells, kill spells, and other protective measures. You probably also want to build in some ways to cheapen the cost of those spells and bump up or multiply the damage you're doing so that you don't actually have to cast like 20 spells to wipe out the table. And then the card draw is just a cherry on top that keeps your hand full. And then, not that you needed it, but they also have Vigilance, which is there, I guess. Next, from Esper spells to Izzet spells with Vivi, who is firstly just the cutest little wizardy dude. Like, what the hell? I love this guy. But also he has a pretty gnarly text box that says that he can pay 0 and add X in any combination of blue or red mana, where X is Vivi's power. Activate only during your turn and only once each turn. This of course comes with the caveat that he can be bounced, in which case you can do it again, which will allow for all sorts of combo shenanigans. But the second half of the text box says that whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we put a 1/1 counter on Vivi and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this deck just wants to sling and sling while we build up our commander using cantrips to keep our hands loaded, along with enchantments like Curiosity and Ophidian Eye, which are gonna draw us just tons of cards. And once he's looking nice and buff, we can use his ability to either storm off or load up on one big crackle of power or something along those lines. And who wouldn't be happy to do that? Alternate win con, we just build him up and then we just fling him, which would be really funny. I've been told by a friend that playing fling in this deck might be lore accurate. Not sure exactly what that means, but yeah, I mean, even just from EDH track, it seems like people think this guy is pretty darn strong, and I can see why. I think even the CEDH crew are eyeing this guy up. The last one I wanted to include here isn't necessarily a spell slinger. It's Graha Tia, Scion Reborn. They are a 3 mana 2/3 with lifelink, and they have an ability called Throw Wide the Gates, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may pay X life, where X is that spell's mana value. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token and put X 1/1 counters on it. Do this ability only once each turn. Now, it's not the most unique thing in the world, but I do think in the colors that it's in, it does serve as a pretty good commander to throw in all of those cards like Talrand, Dika, Murmuring Mystic, and actually one of our new ones here, Hermes, Overseer of Elpis. And you can just go for that sort of spell slinging to make token strategy, but then you've also got the white and the black, so you can play all those token doublers that come in white and gain some life back from the Orzhov synergies. I think it could end up being pretty cool. Okay, but now let's move over to some more combat-centric creatures. And how better to do this than with a Boros commander, of course? This is Lightning, Army of One, who just from the art alone makes me want to pick up one of these Final Fantasy games, if you catch my cold. Hey! But in all seriousness, this is right up my alley. Low to the ground commander with first strike, trample, and lifelink with an ability called Stagger, which says that whenever lightning deals combat damage to a player until your next turn, if a source would deal damage to that player or a permanent that player controls, it deals double damage instead. I know people get tired of seeing these effects that just say double X thing, double damage, triple damage, that sort of thing, but I just think this card is so cool. Like her having first strike so that if you attack with other creatures, she'll hit first and it'll make the rest of your creatures' damage doubled. That's great. Although I will say, even though it's probably not optimal, it does say that you deal double damage to that player until your next turn. So I was thinking it would be kind of cool and unexpected to make like a pinging and spell slinging deck. It might be a little too spread out of a game plan, considering then you'd have to hit someone first and then start slinging spells. But if you're looking for a way to play Boros that isn't just attack face, it could be really interesting. You could take it a step further and play Lightning as a Dragon's Approach deck, and I guarantee no one would see it coming. I feel like in this set there aren't a ton of commanders that are just like solely combat focused, since there is also just a heavy focus in this set on being modified or equipped or having counters or something. But I do just want to give a shout out to Tifa, Martial Artist, who is an awesome 3-mana 4/4 that is not only bringing back melee with style, but gives us some extra combats. And also Squall, Seed Mercenary, who gives solo attackers double strike and can bring back some small stuff from the graveyard. Mechanically, they are similar to a lot of other stuff that we've seen before, so I don't have a ton to say about them, but they are both amazing creatures that I think would serve you well in the command zone or in the 99. Okay, but now we've got a spicy one. Kayn, Traitorous Dragoon. Oh baby. And just look at the other art on this card. Kayn is 3 mana for a 2/4 that firstly has jump, so flying only on your own turn. But also, whenever Kayn deals combat damage to a player, that player gains control of Kayn. If they do, you draw that many cards, create that many tapped treasure tokens, and then lose that much life. It reminds me a lot of Slicer actually, who can be an incredibly potent commander, being that it only needs to deal 21 damage to anyone to kill them, and then it just gets 4 attacks per round of the table. The advantage of Slicer though is that it's goated right off the bat, so you'll probably want to try and do the same thing with Kayn with cards like Vow of Malice, Vow of Torment, Ghoulish Impetus, Parasitic Impetus, and the like. But otherwise, this card just totally changes the dynamic of the game, with it being passed around the table, sapping everyone's life, making treasures, and drawing cards, all while you get to keep stacking up these really unique Voltron elements that you really don't get to play anywhere else. Like Vampiric Link is so good in this strategy, and then of course we have to include some stuff like Homeward Path so that we can take Kayn back when we need him. Once again, on the short list of decks that I want to build, I don't even play a lot of mono black honestly, but Kayn has my attention. Alright, but as I formally mentioned, there is a huge theme of equipment and modified creatures in this set, so let's take a look at some of those by starting with Stoneforge Mystic in the command zone. It's Cloud, Midgar Mercenary. Well, I've said all I can about Cloud Midgar Mercenary, so let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, that ability is incredibly strong, but also the second ability, which doubles triggers of Cloud and equipment attached to him, is huge. On the low end, maybe that's just a little more damage or an extra land off Sword of the Animus. On the high end, well, let's just take a look at all the swords and you can take your pick. They're definitely another new creature that will serve you well in the command zone or in the 99. The next one I will say, from an outside perspective, is a little surprising. This is Gilgamesh, Master at Arms. A 6-mana, 6/6 human samurai that says whenever they enter or attack, look at the top 6 cards of your library. They may put any number of equipment cards from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When you put 1 or more equipment onto the battlefield this way, you may attach one of them to a samurai you control. Okay, wow. So we can get up to 6 equipment if we're lucky, and more likely than not, we aren't going to hit that many, but either way, we get to skip the casting cost and we get to skip the equip cost as long as we control a samurai. And oh, would you looky there, we've already got one. So yeah, I think this is pretty darn strong. It also makes you want to go reach back and check out a bunch of the older samurai cards, like all that stuff that came out from Neon Dynasty, and further beyond that, I think it could be very fun and also being one of the best decks to really satisfy that fantasy fulfillment of playing like a samurai. On the more modified side of things, we've got Sephiroth, Fallen Hero, who is a 5 mana 7/5 that has a pretty unique ability called Genova Cells that says whenever Sephiroth attacks, you may put a cell counter on target creature. Until end of turn, each modified creature you control has base power 7 and toughness 5, which is kind of nuts. If we consider a bunch of those creatures are going to be at the smallest 1/1s, they could be even smaller if you somehow are making 0/0 creatures that enter with counters, but for the sake of this example, we'll say 1/1s. Then they need to be modified, so maybe they all have 1/1 counters. That means that you're giving them a +6 power boost and a +4 toughness boost, and then since it only changes the base power and toughness, they actually end up as 8/6s. That's pretty gnarly, and the fact that he puts counters on your creatures anyways makes it that much easier to pull off. This playstyle reminds me a lot of Graz, who is a really fun deck, I will say. But Sephiroth also says that we can pay 3 and sacrifice a modified creature we control to bring this card back to the battlefield tapped, which is just nice for some consistency of play. But overall, I think you could get really unique with the build of this deck, or just build something generally strong and get attacking like only Boros can. Now, the way Gruul gets attacking, that's a little bit different. This is Red the 8th. Proud Warrior, who very much seems like they would be a cat or dog to some degree, but it would seem not. They are a 3 mana 3/3 with both Vigilance and Trample that give other modified creatures you control Vigilance and Trample. And in these types of decks, it's often the power that's easy to come by, but without Trample in the mix, it can often feel like your biggest attackers are just getting chumped all the time, so that Trample is really appreciated and really easy to apply since our commander is only 3 mana. And the Vigilance just means that we get to be much more free in our attacks, without being as scared of a crackback since our creatures are going to stay untapped. And lastly, they also fetch up an aura or equipment from our graveyard when they enter, which is primarily useful for those auras that go to the yard when they fall off. But I could also see building in a little bit of a graveyard package in this deck so that you can load up your yard and then scoop out the pieces that you need. Once again, a card I think that would be useful in both the 99 or at the helm of its own deck. Alright, but let's move to our last category here, Typled commanders. And in this set, we've got focus on a few strange types, the first of which being birds. And at first, I was going to talk about Bartz and Boko, who, don't get me wrong, are pretty rad, but I don't think they're going to make the best commander. They would, however, fit much better into a Choco, Seeker of Paradise deck. This is a 4 mana 3/5 bird whose text box reads, whenever one or more birds you control attack, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may put one of them into your hand, then put any number of land cards from among those onto the battlefield tapped and the rest into your graveyard. And then they also have landfall, which says whenever a land you control enters, Choco gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So this is just a pretty cool Bant Birds Matter deck, which I know they've mostly been in blue-white in the past. So now we get that extra green color to play all these new Chocobo cards. You also get Birds of Paradise and a bunch of ramp. And hey, where else are we going to play Zodiac Rooster? And the natural next step, of course, after talking about birds is talking about gods. This is Zodiark, Umbral God, who is giving, I'm gonna say it, bad guy vibes. I don't know, just something about him. They are a 5 mana 5/5 god with Indestructible that say that when they enter, each player sacrifices half of the non-god creatures they control of their choice rounded down. Whenever a player sacrifices another creature, we may put a 1/1 counter on Zodiark. So what I think is strange, firstly, is just that it randomly cares about how many gods the table is playing, which is kind of unique, but will ultimately probably not be super relevant unless we choose to play all, I think there's like 10 black gods that there are now. I don't think we can technically play Valky, so like 9 gods, and that would be pretty funny to do here. But I think for the type of strategy that just plays all the Fleshbag Marauders of the world, this is a pretty nice win con. And being that it's indestructible, you should be moderately safe stacking up those counters as the game goes on. I think it would be a pretty funny strategy to try and keep bouncing this card with cards like Conjurer's Closet and Cloudstone Curio, and then just play the Ozolith and just farm counters while you're making everybody sacrifice their creatures. But in definitely more logical of a leap, we have a pretty cool new commander that cares about demons. Now, you have no shortage of good options for demon commanders, but the thing that I think makes Arden really cool is that you could technically make this deck a demonless demon deck. Now, would that be super good? I don't know, probably not, but you could do it. Arden is an 8 mana 4/4 that firstly says demons you control have menace, lifelink, and haste, which is just huge. So yeah, I will admit for 8 mana, you would kind of be squandering him not playing a bunch of other demons. He also has an ability called Star Scourge, which that's a dope name, but it says that at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target creature card from a graveyard. If you exile a card this way, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 5/5 black demon. The part I love most about this card though is that it's any graveyard. So you can steal your opponent's dead stuff, make demons out of them. And not only that, but because this triggers at the beginning of combat and your commander gives those demons haste among other things, you can instantly attack with them, which is just wild. And the last card I wanted to talk about was Setzer, Wandering Gambler. And the Typled category that this one focuses around is one I haven't historically loved, vehicles. Now generally the more cards that are coming out around vehicles, the more I turn around on them, but I just like to see cards that take it in an interesting direction. Setzer is a 3 mana 2/2 human rogue pilot that says, when they enter, create a 3/3 legendary vehicle called the Black Jack. It has flying and crew 2. He also says that whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, flip a coin. Whenever you flip a coin, create 2 treasures. So a few things about this card. This guy rides around in a flying ship called the Black Jack and looks for treasures, and you're gonna tell me he's not a pirate? Okay. Secondly, him coming in and making vehicles that him himself can crew, I respect that. That just instantly takes away one of the frustration points around vehicles away. Thirdly, the ability is really fun. It cares about vehicles, it cares about treasure, and it cares about flipping coins, which is such a fun combination when you put it together that I think this deck is going to force you to play some really kind of deck-specific cards when you're building this, like Tavern Scoundrel, Okun Eye of Chaos, and the RMS Titanic. And fourthly, and maybe most importantly, it's awesome that Setzer doesn't actually care about how we flip the coins. So in the case of Okun, we might just get to make a bunch of extra treasures. Krark's Thumb and all that shenanigans is always a needed include in these types of decks as well. But yeah, those were some of my favorite new commanders from the Final Fantasy set. I know that I'm just scratching the surface here of everything this set has to offer, so let me know what you think about my list and what cards you're personally excited for. I respond to pretty much all my comments, so please let me know down in the comment section. And while you're at it, I would super appreciate if you took a second to just hit that like button if you like this video. Really helps a small channel like myself, and subscribe if you haven't already as we reach for that goal of 5K subs. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Commander in General, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.